Hello and welcome to Cyber Focus, your source for international business information. My name is Tim Smith and our guest today is Michele Honomichl. Michele serves as founder, executive chairman, and chief strategy officer at Celergo. Founded in 2004, Celergo provides a unique combination of technology and services to global employers with employee populations in 3 or more countries. With capabilities to execute payroll compliantly in 150-plus countries, Celergo serves over 200 clients from Fortune 100 companies in dozens of countries, and to small and mid-sized companies, and to those just embarking on their global expansion. Prior to Celergo, Michele was a co-founder of GPSLink and chief architect of the virtual relocation management model. At GPSLink, she provided the strategic direction of the company, managed investors, supported the technology development, and closed initial sales. Before that, she managed the creation of a world-class expatriate administration center and launched a worldwide expatriate management system for Ford Motor Company. Michele holds a BS in finance from Michigan State University and an MBA from Indiana University's Kelley School of Business. In this session, Michele and I will discuss her global career and global company, globalization, and the globalization of business through technology. Michele, thank you so much for joining us today.
Well, it's great to be here. Thank you.
My pleasure, and thank you. Well, it appears from your background that you started your career involved in global business. Was that intentional? If yes, why?
Why? No, it's great. No, it absolutely was intentional. So back even in high school, my first trip outside the United States was to Spain. I had taken Spanish for many, many years, so I could, order a drink or order a meal. That was about it.
Great.
But I always was fascinated with other cultures and the complexity that was out there. So when I went to Michigan State undergrad, I said, look, I really, yes, I want a business degree, but I also want to experience everything global. So that could be, that included, I was part of the ISEC organization. Also, I spent a summer abroad going through multiple different companies, looking at how they did global business, and it was an incredible opportunity. Then I started at Ford, actually in international audit. So I was very fortunate to spend a lot of time on the road. I was young, so that's a great time to do it, and spent most of my time down in Venezuela, Mexico, Germany, and Canada, and a couple of, obviously, audits inside the U.S. So that's my passion. Global is my passion.
Great.
After that, I actually got moved in to help build out an expatriate management center at Ford, and again, still global because those people were moving around the globe. But I realized Ford was completely world-class in what they did. We launched a technology for them in 36 countries, and we still kind of ran around and didn't quite, it was still complex every time we tried to run payroll. So there's got to be a great business need here. So when I went back to graduate school here at Kelley, I said, I'm really going to look at this space. So I studied this space while I was here. I went through and got a finance degree, an entrepreneurship degree, and said, all right, let's do it. Let's follow my passion. Let's follow global and start my first company. And the first company was GPSLink. It was a company that did relocation. It managed the entire relocation process for an expatriate moving, for example, from the US to the UK, managed all the vendors and the complex calculations that go with payroll. But as I was out selling that technology, people would say, that's great, but can you pay my 2 locals in France? And ignorance is bliss. Because I said, how hard can that possibly be, right? I do expats. This has got to be pretty simple. So, basically in 9/11 happened, and we had a recession. A lot of people brought their expats home. So I took that company and broke it up between its investors and started Celergo. And Celergo being a global payroll company. So again, global, very important to us. And not only today because we do payroll in 150 countries, but also because we have offices in Chicago, in Budapest, Singapore, and in Bogota. So again, we have global employees, and also in our office in Chicago, most of our people have some sort of global background, whether they immigrated to the U.S., first generation in the U.S., or just have a passion for global as I do.
Great, thank you so much. So how did that track lead into the creation of Celergo?
Right. So basically, that passion for global and starting out Celergo was really to solve a problem. And it was to solve a problem for clients on the global payroll side. So what would happen is back in, believe it or not, this is back in the early, the early 2000s, companies needed support to process payroll in all these different locations. And they just didn't have that support internally. I mean, they really didn't know how to pay 50 people in Germany, right? Or they didn't know how to handle payroll in Algeria or what even languages were spoken in those countries. So they came to us to say, hey, you guys are the experts in this. Can you do it for us? And that's really kind of the business need that we said we can do it. And not only can we do that, do those payrolls in all those different countries, but we'll give you one view of it globally. So when companies would come to us, whether they're doing a payroll in Argentina or in Australia, or let's pick all the A countries, in Algeria, they can look through our system and they do the same 5 steps. And that's truly kind of the beginning of globalization. Because basically, if you're going to hire somebody in whether it's Algeria or it's Germany or it's Chile, you're going to go through the same process.
Absolutely.
Right?
That's a great point.
Same process. So what we've done is distill that process down for payroll to the same 5 steps. So it's very exciting what we're doing.
Great. Thank you. So how did Celergo meet a global need and have those needs changed? Maybe now that you've been on the global stage for more than a decade.
Right, so 15 years, that's very true. And in the original days when we first started it out, and I actually literally started this company in my basement, so no joke, companies just needed someone to help them do payroll. It's just they call up and say, look, my controller said we're opening an office in Germany. I know nothing about Germany. I run 1,000 people in the US, and we just hired 5 people out there. And what are we going to do, right? And we say, no problem, we'll help you with that. We'll get you set up. We'll sign you up with the government. We'll get you set up for your payroll. We'll process your people. We'll let you know what we need because the requirements are different, obviously, for each country.
Of course.
And so the early days of Celergo, it was all about, like in 2004, it was just really all about executing that payroll, right? Making it happen and making sure it was compliant and people were paid on time. So that was the big push in the beginning. Then it kind of changed over time. So first it was just help me, pay my people. Then it was like, holy cow, I need to be compliant. And I got some big letter and it's in Dutch and there's a big number at the bottom and I don't know what it means. Can you help us become compliant? So they started outsourcing their payroll because they needed the compliance. And we really support companies that are in the sub 1,000 market, we call it, less than 1,000 employees in a given country. Okay. So they don't have oftentimes payroll people there or HR people that know the local law and regulation. So they want to be compliant. So what happens is those companies say, hey, I'm going to outsource this to a company like Celergo, and they can ensure that we're compliant locally. So that was a big driver for quite a few years, was ensuring that compliance. So American companies said, we're not going to be cowboys anymore. We're actually going to do it right. So that was important. Then what happened is from that piece of it, people said, okay, we've got that down. Now can we have visibility? Now we got 5 countries. Can you tell me what my spend is, right? Show me some reporting. How many people do I have? How often do we hire? How often do we fire? Give us some visibility and control over that process. So that was the next big push kind of in the early 2000s. The next step after that was integration. So now you've seen in the early, I call it tens, right? You got the big companies like Ultimate and Workday and Oracle and SuccessFactors. And they've all moved from an on-premise model where companies are doing their payroll themselves on-premise to a cloud model. And by doing that, companies all of a sudden went from having an HR system in the UK that processed and connected to payroll in the UK, and a different HR system in Japan that connected to payroll, to having one global system across the world. So if companies go, if I can do global HR, why can't I do global payroll, right? So it makes absolute sense. And as globalization continued and those processes continued to be refined globally to say, hey, again, we're going to hire somebody. It's the same 4 steps, right? A couple different kinds of paperwork, but same 4 steps, or 5 steps, or 10 steps. Same thing with finance, 4 or 5 steps on the back end. And we're doing that. Why can't we do that with payroll? And so what then happened is, can you integrate my HCM down into my payroll company? Okay, and I want to do that as a one-to-one, one global payroll or one global HCM to one global payroll. So integration became huge, and still remains today, is that these big HCMs that are global are integrating into us, and that's really important to companies because it's speed, accuracy.
Right.
They have better reporting because we take a back feed into the HR, so they can report on payroll and, for example, benefits, right? Or who's going to move on to be pensioned. They've got a full view of their employee base. And as employee engagement becomes more and more important to these companies, because talent is one of your biggest success, what's going to drive your success is your talent, is they're able to provide back to the employee, okay, here's your pay slip in every language around, every pay slip around the world. Here it is in the HR system. You can go in, you can see your benefits here, you can see your pay here, you can see your performance management, you can see all that in one system. And the big push for a lot of companies is engagement, because if your employees are engaged, you're going to keep them. Now, what's interesting is that's kind of been the mantra for the last couple of years, and continues to be the mantra going forward, and we'll see it in the foreseeable future, is this integration component. But the other piece that's come out that's even more, is now pushing companies even more, is compliance has come back. So compliance down here originally several years ago was local compliance. Did I file properly? Did I get my taxes in on time? Now you've got global compliance, mainly around data privacy. So with GDPR in the UK or in Europe, just data privacy around the world, whether it's Russia or it's China or it's the US. How do you manage all those compliance layers globally on top of the compliance layers locally? And we're getting a massive squeeze where you have HCM has to feed, so human capital management systems have to feed their payroll system, which now governments are automating their requirements for statutory requirements. So you now have to have that payroll system feed the government system, sometimes within 24 to 48 hours. You hire somebody, the government needs to know in many countries within 48 hours. So how do you do that, right? So there's become a squeeze, and some big ones like our France and the UK with RTI and Brazil with Social, all those companies or countries are saying, hey, I'm going to squeeze the payroll providers and the companies to give me information about my population, because they have everything just inherently by doing payroll. So now there's becoming, speed is becoming a requirement. So you've got employee engagement, big requirement on the HCM side, speed on the payroll side to feed the global systems. So really, even in my 15 years, even though we've been doing global payroll the whole time, right? Companies have moved from global thinking, I just got to make sure I'm compliant locally in all these countries, to now I've got to be compliant locally and compliant globally. So it's been a big shift. It's been a fun ride. I mean, and it's still got lots and lots of bandwidth out there for us to consume over time. And it's an exciting place to be.
That's great. And all your experiences to apply in today's business sector, today's global business environment, that's a complete competitive advantage for you and your company, Michele. When we talk to friends in local markets and smaller companies that just have not even had the chance because the day-to-day is consuming them.
That is true.
You bring so much to the table to these companies to say, here's what we've done, and we've done it successfully, and we've been throughout the world. That's exciting, because as we try to help our students in the classroom to have a global mindset and think outside just what's in front of them, that's an important step. But to have people to share with them what it really looks like and what they've learned from it and what they're doing as we all move forward together, thank you for taking us through all that. I appreciate it. Yeah. So speaking of globalization and technology, which do you think came first?
Well, it is an interesting question, because in the old days, right, what global meant was a company had offices in other countries, right? So you would say this company is global and ABC company is global because they have ABC France and ABC Japan and ABC Mexico, right? But those countries really acted autonomously because there's no technology, right, or very limited technology. And so they really kind of had to work autonomously, and you might send an expat over or something, and they were there to deliver to the local market. It was all downwards, right? Well, what's happened with technology is technology has allowed companies to say, hey, you know what, I can have some international people at headquarters because now I can start pulling that data into the U.S., for example, if it's a U.S. headquartered country. So I would say like 5-7 years ago, you would say if I need to talk to the international person, all the international people would be on floor 7. They kind of hid them away, right? But they were kind of talking then to all the different offices. Still the offices were doing their own things, right? But the international team was starting to say, hey, can we start standardizing that, right? And start sharing amongst the different groups. So, you know, Germany, you can work with Mexico because you guys are working on a similar project. And, you know, how do we facilitate that? And all of a sudden technology, just with like GoToMeeting and some of the Skype, right?
Absolutely.
You know, some of the basic that talking is cheap and it's easy now. So that's really starting to facilitate it. But where it's gone is that the globalization has even taken a next step. So now what's happened is that instead of, hey, global used to be, hey, I have an office in the UK, to, okay, now I have international people on floor 7, it's now just become part of your job. So if you're a payroll person, in the old days, you'd say, oh, I don't do any of that global payroll stuff. Or if I'm an HCM person, I don't do any of that global stuff. You know, that's somebody, that's Bob on the floor below me. Now it's part of my job. So the career path has changed. So if people say, I'm only going to do accounting and I'm going to know accounting for the U.S., that's not the reality anymore. You're going to have to understand how the accounting in the U.S. links to a global accounting system that's managing it globally. And global is going to become part of your job. And it's something that it's not on the 7th floor or it's not in another country anymore. It is inherently part of your job. And if people don't embrace that, you know, part of the change, you know, they're not going to go very far in their career because that, unless they're going to work for a company that's only landlocked in a particular country, which is not common anymore, because we even see startups, they start up an office right away because it's easy, right? It's easy. They got tons of companies that'll help them do that. It's just inherently part of their job. So I think it's also a very exciting part of globalization because now with the technology and with globalization, you as a person coming up in your career, you can actually look out and say, hey, I get to work with people from China and people from South Africa and all over the world, and we're all driving towards the same vision. So instead, you know, we talk about in the old days, you know, ABC Company South Africa may have a very different vision than ABC US or ABC, you know, Singapore. It might be a very different goal set that they're trying to reach, maybe a different P&L. Now it's everybody is trying to drive, everybody's in the same boat trying to drive a similar experience or a similar process to get the company to go forward. So I think there's a big wave if companies, and there are still companies out there that still think of themselves as multinational versus global. And the ones that think of themselves as global, I think, are really the ones that are going to succeed. Because the multinationals are still saying, hey, I still have ABC Mexico, ABC Singapore, and they're thinking very, you know, about their own structure and their own problems and not looking at, hey, how do I fit into the global vision that the company is trying to execute?
Absolutely, and I hope they're listening.
I hope so. There you go. Well, the ones that actually, even if they're not listening, the ones that are doing that are the ones that are successful. They're getting rewarded for it already. So it's an exciting place to be, though.
Great. Thank you. So maybe talking a little bit about globalization and trends in both your space and in business. Any other thoughts, things you're witnessing, things you'd like to be witnessing? What would you share with us?
That's an interesting question. So I'm a globalist at heart, right? So I've always loved global, and I'm not concerned about it or nervous about it. What we do see, what I think is interesting, is that companies, truly global companies, do not see themselves as a US company or a German company or a British company or a Mexican company. The ones that are truly global see themselves as their own entity. So that's a very different concept, because all of a sudden people would ask me all these questions. What do you think about, current events with the government, whether that's here in the US or what's going on in Europe or going on in Russia and things like that? And I say it's interesting, and companies watch it, but the truly global companies just say, I have another hoop to jump through. It doesn't concern me. I'm not a US company. I'm a global entity on my own. All right, so we have to do RTI in the UK. We're going to do it. And I'm going to hire people around. I'm going to go find the best talent, and I'm going to find the best processes wherever it resides in the entire world, and I'm going to deploy that. So in the old days, a great example of an HR system, if you're going to deploy an HR system, you'd run around and you'd say, okay, I've got, Sarah in the UK is going to run it for the UK, and I got Jose in Mexico is going to run it in Mexico, and I got, Heinrich in Germany is going to run it for Germany, and they're all going to look at their own processes and come up with what they're going to do, and then we'll try to build it into a global product. That, today what they do is they look out and they say, hey, you know what? Bob in Australia knows this stuff cold. He's done it 3 or 4 times. He'd be an excellent resource. Let's get him to run the whole project. Regardless where the company's headquartered, we're going to have him run the whole project because he's the best at it. And then we're going to find people to help support him for whatever he needs. Right? And so what's interesting about it is they're not saying, I need to do this as a country by country process. We're going to look at this on a global or holistic level and do it what's right for the company. So what's interesting is you're seeing a lot of nationalism type situations that are happening around the globe.
Okay.
People are trying to close their borders for different reasons, and whether they're doing it through maybe some sort of regulation, or they might be doing it in guise of privacy or something to that extent. All different kinds of agendas that are going on. The horse is out of the gate. I mean, the data's flowing, right?
Indeed.
It's very hard to put it back in. Now, there are many things that go with those that I think are very important. Like privacy is very important, and it's an important thing to do, but it shouldn't be restrictive in the sense that companies should be careful with the data. They should make sure it's safe. They should only use it for what they need it for. All those kinds of things are good, but it shouldn't restrict trade. Right?
Absolutely.
And these companies, as I said, they think of themselves as a separate entity. They're not just bound by one set of rules of one government. They're just going to continue to work to execute their vision. And I think those are the ones that really have the staying power and the ones that are going to be successful.
Okay. Michele, thank you. And thank you so much for coming in to speak with us today.
Okay, great. It was my pleasure.
Well, that's all the time we have for this edition of Cyber Focus. Thank you for tuning in. If you have any comments or suggestions for future topics, please let us know at CIBER, that's CIBER, at indiana.edu.